Hello, welcome to a special studio edition of Europe and You.
This time on the programme, we're talking bank accounts.
It's estimated that more than 1 million people in the UK don't have one. Now the European Parliament is calling for changes to the rules so that everyone can get access to basic banking services.
Here to discuss why it matters, the Conservative spokesperson on economic and monetary affairs here in the European Parliament, Kay Swinburne.
And Trine Saag from the European Foundation for Financial Inclusion. Let me turn to you first. Across Europe, some 30 million people don't have bank accounts. Why? What's the problem?
There are various reasons why people are not able to open bank accounts, and maybe I would like to highlight two of them. For example, there are many still administrative barriers to people who want to open up bank accounts. For example, when people move from one member state to the other, they are required to present certain documentation which they are not yet able to provide when they move to a different member state. For example, this can be a request for a residency permit or, for example, recent pay slips which they don't have in that country. And also there are problems still around the cost of bank accounts, because even today there are very high costs sometimes in some member states on the bank accounts. For example, until recently in Italy there was even a state tax on bank accounts which was about 34 euros per year, and that's not all, because there are also other costs, for example, which are for the services, and that especially affects vulnerable consumers, for example students or the elderly who are not able to, for example, afford this kind of amount of fees.
And Kay, in the UK, I mean, one of the problems Trine was talking about there was the cost. In the UK, we're not so used to paying for bank accounts. Do you accept, though, that there is a problem with people accessing just basic banking services?
I think there are huge differences, not just across member states, but even within member states, as to why people can't open a bank account, or indeed some people still don't want to open a bank account. And as we move more to electronic payments, particularly of things like the child benefit in the UK and various child credits and such like, people now need bank accounts, whereas before maybe they might have survived on a cash basis. So now we need to look at how we might provide for those who have slightly more tailored needs. And for us, I think it's involving a lot more institutions than maybe the normal high street retail banks. I think we might need to look a little more closely at some of those other institutions who have been providing for some of the most socially disadvantaged in our society, such as in my own constituency, the credit unions, who are providing a phenomenal service for those socially disadvantaged people who find managing money quite difficult and need more than just a bank account. They need help running their finances.
And we'll come on, I think, a bit later to credit unions. But let me ask you then, Trine, Kay mentioned there electronic payments becoming more common, but do people really need bank accounts? Why is this such a problem that a lot of people don't have them? Well,
we have to admit that nowadays having a bank account has become a prerequisite to participate in the modern society, to be able to the bank account enables us, for example, to receive our salaries, to receive the benefits, to be able to pay for the bills, utilities. It also enables us to have services, payment services, with which we pay for our goods and services. So it has actually become really a prerequisite also of social inclusion in the society. So our foundation truly believes that bank accounts are needed, and the take-up of bank accounts needs to be accelerated.
Kay Swinburne, what the European Parliament seems to be calling for is for basic bank accounts to be made available to everybody, almost regardless really of their credit history, their debt, for example. Do you think that is workable for banks, first of all? We'll come to credit unions a bit later on, but for commercial banks, is that workable?
I think it's very difficult, given that even though many of them have been bailed out, and we're very familiar with that in the UK with the taxpayers' money, they are still not state-owned entities. They are commercial entities. So it's very difficult to mandate that they have to provide a service to everybody, regardless of credit history. And if somebody has a very poor credit history, I think there have to be some precautions, and they have to be allowed not to extend credit. So maybe just a paying in account whereby they literally can only pay in money and actually take out the money and pay out the money that is actually in the account at that current point in time. That, I think, is basic prudence, and we wouldn't want to be encouraging people into debt anyway. And so therefore that actually is probably fairly acceptable. The real issue is that, of course, banks don't make money out of people purely paying in a salary or paying in an amount of money each month and taking the equivalent amount out. They don't make their money that way. And so I think it's very difficult to then see, if there's no ancillary services, that the rest of the bank's clients will end up subsidising it. And I think there lies the problem, that Europe hasn't quite grasped yet. Who pays for this? Is it the commercial entity and its customers across a broader base, or is it the state who should be subsidising this? And that's where I think maybe we slightly diverge in terms of where I think the onus needs to be and where the emphasis should be going forwards.
And where do you stand on exactly that?
Yeah, I completely agree that I think also what was within the recommendation of the Commission and in the report is that we're talking here about the access to basic banking services. So we're not talking about credit, but we're just talking about the right of every person to have the basic bank account and basic banking services, which will enable us to participate fully in a society.
But how would you do that if the banks are allowed to make the commercial decision of what customers they want and don't want, or would you like to do away with that? Would you want to insist on
providing
all
a bank account to one person will not cost so much to a bank which earns enough on other customers, and it's just about giving, because also when we get our benefits, or if we get our salary, in a way we still provide the bank with some funds which they can actually loan to the others and earn interest rates on that. So I believe really the cost of providing a bank account to each and every single citizen is not a very high cost. And we're also talking about not providing them necessarily for free, but at a reasonable cost. So I was making an example of Italy, where the state was taxing even the bank accounts, and then we put the fees that might be too high for vulnerable consumers, and that's what we're talking about, capping the fees and eliminating at least state taxes on bank accounts, which is maybe not the case in the UK, but it's in some other member states, and that's why we're harmonizing the legislation throughout the European Union.
I mean, as we understand it, your organisation was set up really to specifically lobby on this issue. Do you feel that MEPs in the European Parliament are moving in the right direction? We have had this recent resolution.
Yeah.
Do you think you're getting closer to what you want?
Yes, they are moving in the right direction. I was speaking before about my own experiences. For example, I studied in 5 different countries, 4 of them in the European Union, and I can make just a comparison. When I was a student and I was denied once a bank account because I wasn't profitable to the bank, and once I was denied access to certain services such as a debit card, because again I wasn't able to provide my pay slip, but I was a student and I wanted to receive my scholarship. So there is also an issue with mobility. There is also an issue of our freedoms within the European Union to move freely, and actually I also filed a petition to the European Parliament's Petitions Committee about my right to move freely and switch my bank accounts, and it was also included in this report, in the opinion of this report, where the concern about the mobility of students, of residents, mobile workers was highlighted.
Kay Swinburne, one of the main problems seems to be people who are disadvantaged, that don't have a lot of funds. If banks aren't able to fill that void, are credit unions, you mentioned them earlier, is this a role where that they can play?
Well, I think the problem we have here, I mean, I have great sympathy for people who are actually moving from one member state to the other, and particularly those who are actually wanting to move to either study or to earn a living. I think the problem I have is this requirement of one size fits all across Europe. And we all have very different requirements, and as individuals, there is not one solution. And for those people who find finance generally very difficult, they need more assistance, and just having access to the bank account doesn't help them. And so my experience of the credit unions I go and visit are that they actually provide a very personalised service. They actually help people manage their money. They help them pay their bills, they help them prioritise what needs to be paid on a weekly basis. And that, I think, is something that we need to be looking a lot more carefully at. That can't be provided on a commercial basis. It will never be profitable for those institutions who are out there providing the commercial banking activity. So we need to find other ways. And for me, the way around it is very much the way my own member state has gone about it, is actually funding those credit unions, providing them with a capital buffer that they can then use to actually provide the services to those most disadvantaged and most needy in society. That for me is a really good solution. It may not work across all 27 member states, but I also don't think actually mandating that every commercial bank provides an account for everybody who requests it is also a solution, because cost-wise, that isn't a solution. We all know that somebody has to pay for the services, and if it's not those who are actually getting the basic bank account, it will be those who are actually using the more sophisticated services of the bank who will pay for it. So it's somewhere along the line somebody does have to pay. It's not a free ride in this. It's a question of whether or not the state acknowledges a problem for that socially difficult group of people who need more than just a bank account. And I think that's where I would concentrate more of my time. And having visited some wonderful institutions around my own constituency, I really do think that that would be where I would focus a lot of my energies.
And do you think that there is a danger that by mandating commercial banks to provide banking services, basic banking services to all, could that undermine credit unions like the ones that you're talking about in your constituency, do you think?
Well, I think it is a very serious threat, and I raised it in the plenary when we were talking about this last month, and spoke in the plenary debate about it, saying that actually we need to be very careful that when we mandate something, if you then set up a competitive situation between credit unions and a commercial bank, it's very difficult to see, and credit unions of course do charge for their service, although it's a manageable fee. There is a real issue that you will taking away the niche of the market that they're in, because you're actually up against the big boys as they see it. And just simple things like an ATM machine for a credit union is a huge expense. They cost tens of thousands of pounds to install. They can't put one in every credit union branch, whereas obviously a high street bank can. And so there are some big issues here that competition may not be good for all of those providing a niche service. But I think the report was very good in its basis from the Parliament, but in my opinion it went too far. It did actually request that everybody should be entitled to a bank account, not just people who are resident in their member state, and not even those people who are actually coming for a purpose to another member state to work or to study. It included all those people who are actually maybe just migrating through a member state with no resident status. And that for me is a step way too far, because once you start extending this beyond the scope of the EU27, there are some real issues here about what is actually acceptable and not acceptable for our banks in Europe right now.
Trine Sarg, what do you make of that? Would you like to see banking services available to all, and by all do you include all those groups?
I would definitely, because we, again, from my own experience, I can tell from the student experience, it might take months to first get the residency. The administrations are very low, the foreign offices are giving out the residency permits very slowly. It has taken me up to a year to get residency permit in a country. So imagine if all this year I didn't have the bank account just because I didn't have the certificate to show that I had an address in that country.
And how about, if not a bank account, how about credit unions? Would you see them as playing a role in this rather than the commercial banks?
From my own experience, I haven't had experience with credit unions because I think it's particular to certain countries. But what I would like to see in Europe is a harmonized system, harmonized rights. When I move from one member state to the other, that I can go to the bank and know that more or less the same rules apply, and I can be confident that I can get a bank account and the rules are equal for everybody across all the member states.
Well, the Parliament has asked the European Commission to come up with proposals for new laws on basic banking by next January.
That's it from Europe and You. Thanks to our two guests for joining us. We'll be back again soon.
More, as always, on our website and on Twitter. Goodbye.
Goodbye.